all living in America have the unique flavor of navigating through native and European beliefs. In 5 centuries, both have been mixed and incorporated into local folklore. Latin America, with its modern countries built over the lands of different pre-existent indigenous groups, has an interesting mixture of beliefs mixed in. Among the most famous is La Llorona. We bring you 4 scary encounters with La Llorona, sent to us by our audience members. Some say La Llorona was La Malinche, who, according to popular myth, was Hernan Cortez's interpreter and lover and who drowned her children after being abandoned. Scholars associate La Llorona with Cihuacotl, a Mexican goddess associated with warriors and women who died in childbirth. Others connect La Llorona with La Dama de Blanco, the Lady of White. Mediterranean countries have many versions of this tale concerning a young lady who died of illness or committed suicide after being left by her lover. I used to date a Mexican girl when I was in my early 20s. After around half a year of seeing each other, her family invited us to spend Christmas with them. This was during the late 80s in Guanajuato, central Mexico. The whole family reunited in an old ranch in a rural area. It was filled with friends and relatives everywhere. The ranch also had a lot of animals. I remember going out one night and noticed the dogs were nervous. There was a stream around 20 meters away, and if you squinted your eyes at night, you could even see the curve in the darkness. I saw some cousins, and we began to chat. Suddenly, the dogs started to bark and whine. Howls, tail shaking, trembling bodies. My eyes caught a glimpse of something moving amidst the trees. The other guys saw it too. A white figure was moving. There was something very creepy about the whiteness of the dress. Too shiny to be normal, it didn't fit with the night. At that point, the dogs got hysterical and began to howl and grunt in the same direction. Some guys had to grab them to stop the animals from chasing the woman. Suddenly, we heard a wail, a high-pitched noise, but deep and long-lasting. All the hairs on my neck stood up. Some cousins hurried inside. The others began to yell at the woman, but no one even thought to grab the rifle in the house. The weeping woman disappeared in the air as soon as she came, but I'll never forget the dread of that night. When I was in college, a professor of mine was granted a scholarship for an art project. The idea was to begin the restoration works of a colonial church in a small town in northern Mexico. The place had a lot of ancient Hispanic architecture, and our church was placed on the outskirts of town, next to a tiny graveyard. We occupied a little cabin by the church, usually reserved for maintenance officials. There was no water in our building, so we had to put a bucket inside an antique well if we wanted to cook and wash our clothes. One night, I woke up early, really needing to go to the bathroom. I went outside by a tall, thin tree by the well. My phone was the only source of light as it was quite dark out. Afterwards, I lit a cigarette and relaxed, listening to the silence of the night. For some reason, my ears started ringing. First, quietly, then growing louder. That's when a chill ran down my spine. Everything was quiet, even the ringing. Then, a distant wail reaches me. It came from behind. I turned around, freaking out, soon realizing I froze. By the church's entrance, a woman dressed in white was crying. Her shoulders shook as she wept, but something was off about the volume. It was like turning on and off a stereo, with an intensity that no normal person could emit. It switched from coming from her direction and the well next to me. Finally, I realized I could move and ran inside and found my classmates awake. They even went out to check with their cell phones, but no one was found and the silence of the night was restored. My mother had friends everywhere, so it seemed, and brought us along on her trips. There was this summer when I was around 9 years old when she brought us to Costa Rica to meet some friends of hers. It was a family who lived in a rural area in an old building next to a river surrounded by crops. The adults pretty much left us to our own devices, and we spent most of the time running around the woods, crops, and exploring the small river. They had a lot of dogs, and the majority followed us everywhere. We were forbidden from wandering out at night, which naturally we disobeyed one afternoon. The kids silently grabbed lanterns, snacks, and hid them in their towels before going to the river. We'd planned to stay after twilight. 5 kids surrounded by dogs, having a picnic by a small river during dusk. When it began to get dark, I got my siblings out of the water, fearing snakes. At some point, everything got quiet, unnaturally quiet. No rustling of leaves or the sounds of the current. Suddenly, the animals got tense, and I remember feeling something was off around us. I was a kid back then, but you know when things are out of place. Someone yells, and the dogs begin to bark furiously. Far away, we saw a feminine figure on the other bank of the river. Her hair was long and dark, and she was wearing a long, white dress. It was what made me realize how eerie it was. Her movements appeared as if her joints were impaired, and she hurriedly maneuvered in a lengthy gown. We all began to scream, grabbed our things, and sprinted back home. Some of the dogs followed us, others remained barking in the woods. After that, we didn't wander outside for the remainder of the vacation. I was backpacking in Texas when I decided to spend a couple of days in a pretty rural town. I rented a room in the house of an old Hispanic couple. They had a gorgeous female Maine Coon who loved to cuddle and spent time in my room on the second floor. One day, the cat got anxious and nervous. She hid below the bed and later inside the closet. I didn't think too much into it as I didn't know the cat well and left the house. Hours later, I returned home from a trekking excursion and collapsed on my bed, exhausted. But I woke up at 2 a.m. hearing my cat hissing at the window and immediately seeing a white figure walking. She seemed to be murmuring something. The steps were slow, and I remember seeing something similar to ruffles on what looked like a dress. Then came a weeping sound, and the cat hissed furiously at it with her back arched, all fur standing up like a hedgehog. I grabbed my cell phone and called my host to ask what was going on, but no answer. Just the dialing tone with the machine following for a voicemail. In the end, I stood up, but then remembered with horror that we were on the second floor. I returned to my bed. I heard no steps or any type of movement. If anything, the surroundings were unnaturally quiet, both inside and outside the house. I did not feel brave enough to leave my room. The cat leapt into the bed with me, but I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. When I questioned my hosts the next morning, they weren't exactly surprised. Apparently, it wasn't uncommon to receive visits of La Llorona in that town. That was the last night I stayed there.